The opening paragraph is one of the great Bible characters of both Old and New Testaments is David, the shepherd boy who became king of God's chosen people. He is talked about in many books of the Bible with hundreds of references. He wrote many of the songs recorded in the book of Psalms. He was the founder of the Davidic dynasty, the line of kings eventually leading to the Messiah. Since so much biblical material is devoted to him and is such an important figure in the Word of God, we will be spending several lessons on his life story. And in fact, the total number is 26 lessons on David. So we'll be on it for a while. I'm going to read a couple of verses out of 1 Samuel chapter 8, the first 9 verses. Here's 1 Samuel 8:1. And it came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain, and took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. But the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Like all the deeds which they have done since the day that I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now then, listen to their voice. However, you shall solemnly warn them and tell them of the procedure of the king who will reign over them. All right. So on our question sheet, question number 1, what were Samuel's sons' names? Joel and Abijah. Were they godly men? No. So specifically it lists that they accepted bribes, they perverted justice, and they were looking to make money on their office. What did the elders of Israel want? A king. They said, give us a king. Samuel, you've been leading us for a while. By the way, Samuel is kind of a transition figure. You can see where he's seen as the last of the judges. So he kind of fits into the judges slot. He does offer sacrifices, even though he's not a Levite. He's not a priest, but he does officiate at sacrificial ceremonies. He's another office holder as well. He's called a prophet. So he's kind of a transitional figure. And of course, he anoints the first 2 kings of Israel, Saul and David. So who did the elders of Israel want their nation to be like? All the nations around us. They all have kings. And later on in this chapter it says, we want a king who will fight our battles for us and be regal and look noble. So they want to be like all the other nations. Number 2, did Samuel like the idea of a king for Israel? Not at all. Very much not. How did he say a king would treat the people? So it sounds like government from the very beginning, doesn't it? So some of the things that he said down in verse 11, he will take your sons and place them for himself in his chariots and among his horsemen, and they'll run before his chariots. He'll appoint for himself commanders of thousands and of 50s, and some to do his plowing and to reap his harvest and to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will also take your daughters for perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his servants. He will take 1/10 of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. He will also take your male servants and your female servants and your best young men and your donkeys and use them for his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his servants. Then you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. He's painting kind of a bleak picture, isn't he? Is that accurate? Pretty much. That's pretty much how it goes. The king says, well, if you want me to be your king, you got to support me. And I have a big family and a big staff. And in fact, I have an army. So feed me. And that's how it goes. So Samuel is trying to warn the people of what this is going to be like, but they don't listen. They say, no, no, we want a king. Number 3, what was Saul's father's name? Kish. Great name. Would that be a nice baby name? Here's my son Kish. Yeah. What tribe was he from? Benjamin. And what was Saul looking for in the land of Ephraim? His father's donkeys. So they've got donkeys. Donkeys are used a lot. Maybe the most commonly used beast of burden in the Middle East. More than camels, more than oxen. Horses were almost never used for plowing or for pulling wagons. Horses were for kings and armies and super rich people. So you didn't use horses. You use horses for war. You don't use horses for anything else. So horses were not used for plowing or for bearing burdens. But the most common animal that was used everywhere was a donkey. And so Kish has donkeys. They got out of the pen, and they took off for the woods, and now they're gone. So Saul and the servant are on a mission to find them. What did he and his servant decide to do to find them? They looked, and finally said, the servant says, well, in this town there's a man of God, and we should go ask him, because he'll tell us. He'll tell us true where they are. By the way, they use a different word instead of prophet. Did you catch that other word? Seer. Yeah. So number 4, what characteristics did Saul have in 9:1 and 2? Choice and handsome, and from the shoulders up, he's taller than anybody else, the tallest man in Israel. And he's described as a mighty man of valor. Now we get the impression by his behavior and his characteristics, he's never been in battle, he's never fought. But he looks like he should be. You know, he's built. He is a really strong looking guy. He looks like he could handle a shield and a sword. So he's good looking, choice, handsome, tall. Number 5, was Benjamin a large tribe? That's actually the smallest tribe. And that dates back into the time of the Judges. It was small to begin with, and in the time of the Judges, it was very nearly wiped out. It very nearly went extinct because of a civil war. Where did Samuel have Saul sit in the hall? At the head table. It must have been kind of disconcerting for Saul, don't you think? Here's this kid, and he's looking for his dad's donkeys, and he wanders into this village, and the girls say, yeah, the prophet is up there, go find him, he's getting ready to offer a sacrifice. And so he and his servant go up the hill, and they come to the town square, and Samuel says, I've been waiting for you. And I saved the choicest cut of the ox for you. It's been cooked and it's ready. Come sit down. And Saul comes in, and Samuel says, over here. And it's the head table. And Saul, we get the impression that Saul would like to kind of melt into the woodwork. He doesn't want to be at the head table. He doesn't want anybody to see him. He's very quiet and retiring, but that's where he's got to sit. He's got to sit at the head table. Number 6, what did Samuel pour on Saul's head? Flask of oil. So he sent the servant on ahead, and Samuel and Saul were walking together, and Samuel says, listen to me for a minute. And Saul stops, and then he takes a flask of oil and dumps it over his head. And he says, God has chosen you. What did Saul prophesy was to happen to Saul in 10:5-7? Several things, but the most important of them is the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you mightily. The Spirit of God is going to take over you, and that's going to happen. Where did Samuel say he would meet with Saul again? At Gilgal. And did Samuel's prophecies about Saul come true? Every one of them. Every single one of them happened just like Samuel had said. So at number 7, what did Saul tell his uncle about what Samuel had told him? This is, again, indicative of Saul's character at this point. He says, yeah, Unc, I was looking for Dad's donkeys. They got out, and I've been looking all over creation. He failed to mention that Samuel the prophet had anointed him as king. He left that little piece out. So again, you have the impression that Saul is pretty humble. He's not looking for this. He's just an ordinary guy at this point. And those qualities are kind of endearing. They're kind of good. You know, he's not full of himself. He doesn't puff himself up. He just is a quiet guy. How did Samuel show the people of Israel the one who was chosen as king? By lot. So this is drawing straws or some mechanism like that, where you've seen it before, like with Achan, the guy who stole the gold at the Battle of Jericho. God shows who the individual is by lot. So increasingly shorter straws or something like that until you narrow it down to this family and this individual. So who told Samuel where Saul was hiding? The Lord did. So God directly told Samuel, yeah, he's hiding. And where was he hiding? By the baggage. He was back with the donkeys again. He was back, with the baggage carts, kind of hunkered down with all the suitcases around him. And Samuel sends somebody to get him and says, the man of God would like to see you. So how did you find me? So he's back by the baggage. Number 8, what was an outstanding physical trait of Saul? It's mentioned again. He's tall. He's a tall guy. And what did the people shout? Long live the king. Now, pause for a moment. This is not on our sheet. But can you see some of the story that is being told here in this narrative? What did the people want? They wanted a king. What kind of a king? A king who will fight our battles. So God gave them a tall guy. You can see him across the battlefield. He's big. He's a big guy. He looks muscular. He's handsome. His face looks good in the newspaper photos. And the people of Israel got what they wanted. They got a photogenic, tall king. That's what they're asking for. And so God, sometimes, do you think, God disciplines us by giving us what we wanted? Yeah. Sometimes we say, oh God, if you just give me that, I'd be so happy. And he says, you're not going to like it. No, I'll love it. It's just what I've always wanted. It'll be bad for you, but I want it. I won't let it be bad. Okay. And it's really bad. It turns out to be a real monster. Well, that's what the people wanted. Number 9, what did Samuel tell the people in 10:24? Here's the one whom the Lord has chosen at your insistence, and there is no one like him. And it's true. He's the tallest guy. He's a veritable giant. Number 10, where did everyone go in 10:25? Each to his own house. So they all, okay, we got us a king. And then everybody goes back to ordinary life. And where did Saul go? Back to his home in Gibeah. So he's got farming to do. He says, I got to trim those vines, and I got weeds to hoe, and I got work to do. I got to get back there. Who went with him? Now this is interesting. Valiant men. So there were men who were courageous. They trusted God. They had a view of strength in the kingdom. They said, we want to be a part of this. And why did they go with him? It says so. Valiant men whose hearts the Lord had touched. Isn't that interesting? So there's apparently a small group of, we don't know how many, was it 12, was it 20, we don't know. But they went back with him, and they are probably going to form like his personal guard. That they're probably going to be the guys that he becomes friends with, and they say, well, we're here to take care of you. And it says specifically, the Lord had touched their hearts. You know, there's something interesting about that. Do you think that everybody in North Conway would be happy coming to our church? No. You know, 95% of the people in North Conway would not be happy here. This is not what they're looking for. But what we want are the people whose hearts the Lord has touched. Those individuals who are looking for something that's not just entertainment, something that's not just appeasing and appealing, something that is genuine worship and genuine truth from the Word of God and genuine fellowship. And we want those people. And so, very interesting, a band of men whose hearts the Lord had touched. Last question, who spoke insultingly about Saul? Certain worthless men. So there were some ragamuffins on the outskirts of things, and they said, who is this guy? You know, it might be that he even looked a little naive. It might be that he even behaved as kind of a rube, kind of a hick. And these people look at him and say, you want a warrior? That's not a warrior. And how did Saul respond to that? Just quiet. Now, at this stage in the story, we can't help but have a level of admiration for Saul. He's actually doing pretty well. He's humble. He's not full of himself. He's not looking to push himself onto people. He's not assuming that he is the greatest. And when he has the opportunity to, rag on somebody because they insulted him, he declines. He just keeps his peace. And we'll find out later on, after the first battle that he presided over, when certain other people said, those guys that were insulting you, we should kill them. And we'll find out that Saul actually had a good response to that too. So at this point, you can't help but be somewhat impressed by Saul and his humility and his character. He seems to be level-headed, and things are kind of positive at this point for King Saul. Questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. I don't know. That's a good question. How old was Saul at this point? And I don't know. I'm not sure that I've ever read chronology, but that's a great question. Yeah, the chronologies are sometimes pretty tough to get at, trying to pin down dates and lengths of reign and so on, but that's worth investigating. Any other questions or comments? Okay.